My name is Clara Morgan, and I'm 29 years old. But the story I'm about to tell you began when I was 14, long before I knew what betrayal really meant, back when I still believed love could fix anything. Back then, music wasn't just something I loved, it was the only way I knew how to speak. My piano wasn't just an instrument, it was a heartbeat. Every key had fingerprints of my childhood on it. Hours of practice, tears over wrong notes, joy over the right ones. My father bought it for me when I was 10, a second-hand upright Yamaha, with tiny scratches on the lid and a chipped pedal. He said, "A few scars don't make it any less beautiful, Clara." Same with people. He died 2 years later. After that, I played even more. Every note was like talking to him. Sometimes I'd press my ear against the wood, just to hear the vibration echo through me, pretending it was him answering back. My mother, Linda Morgan, never understood that. She wasn't cruel, not in the obvious way. She just had this selective affection. The kind that only bloomed for my younger sister, Sophie. Sophie, with her golden hair and movie poster smile. She was 3 years younger than me, a born performer, graceful, charismatic, the kind of person everyone noticed the moment she walked into a room. I was quieter. The background music to her spotlight. Mom used to say, "Sophie just needs a little more attention, Clara. She's delicate." I didn't argue. I just nodded and went back to my piano. It never asked for attention. We lived in a small house in Oregon, where winters felt endless and the walls carried every sound. When I practiced, Sophie would stomp upstairs and yell, "Clara, can you stop? I can't hear my music." Her music was always loud, pop songs that thumped through her headphones so hard I could hear every beat from across the room. I learned early how to make myself smaller, quieter. I practiced late at night with the soft pedal down, whispering my emotions into the keys. Then came the spring of Sophie's first gala. She was 17 and had just been selected to represent her high school in some big regional fashion and performing arts event. Mom was ecstatic. Finally, something to brag about at church and book club. She couldn't stop talking about it. "Clara, you should see the invitation. It's a full evening affair, dinner, music, the works." I smiled and said I was happy for Sophie, but inside, I felt the sting of invisibility again. Still, I practiced harder that week. I had an audition coming up at the state conservatory. I wanted that scholarship so badly it made my chest ache. 3 days before my audition, I came home from school and found the living room empty, emptier than it should have been. The space where my piano stood was bare, leaving behind only a clean rectangle of dustless carpet and an echo that made my stomach twist. At first, I thought maybe Mom had moved it for cleaning. But when I called for her, she appeared in the hallway, folding laundry like it was just another day. "Mom, where's my piano?" She didn't even look up. "Oh, honey, I sold it." I blinked. "You what?" "I sold it," she repeated, as if she'd said she'd rearranged the furniture. "We needed the money." "For what?" "For Sophie's dress, sweetheart. You know the gala's this weekend. She couldn't go in that old thing from last year." The words hit me like ice water. "You sold my piano, Dad's piano, for a dress?" "Clara, don't be dramatic," she sighed, setting the folded towels on the couch. "It's just a piano. You can always buy another one someday." I could barely breathe. That piano was the last thing my father ever gave me. It was the one part of him that still lived in this house, the one place where I felt close to him. And she had sold it, not to pay bills or fix the roof, but to buy Sophie a dress. I remember walking into my room and closing the door, so quietly it hurt. I sat on the floor and stared at my hands, the same hands that had once danced across ivory keys, now shaking like they didn't know where to go. That night, while Sophie twirled in her new silver gown in front of the mirror, I sat on my bed and listened to her laugh through the wall. It wasn't her fault, not really. She didn't know what Mom had done. But in that moment, something inside me cracked, not from jealousy, but from understanding. I realized I was never going to be loved the same way. 2 days later, I still went to my audition, borrowing time on the school's dusty old piano. I played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, and halfway through, I almost forgot where I was. My fingers moved out of memory, not joy. When I finished, the examiner said softly, "You play like you've lost something." I smiled. I did. I didn't get the scholarship. After that, I stopped playing. For years. I focused on surviving. College. A job in accounting. An apartment far from home. Music became a ghost I didn't talk about. Mom would call sometimes, mostly to talk about Sophie, her modeling gigs, her travel plans, her life that always sounded like it belonged in glossy magazines. I'd nod and say that's great and pretend I didn't care. But I did. Every time I heard Sophie's name, I felt a dull echo of those empty living room walls. Then one night, 10 years later, I got a message. It was Sophie. "Hey Clara, long time. I have some news. I'm performing at the Portland Philharmonic Gala next month. I'd love for you to come. It's a huge night for me, and they've got this special vintage piano being showcased. You'll appreciate it. You're the music expert." I stared at the screen for a long time. Vintage piano. Philharmonic Gala. The words sat heavy in my chest. I hadn't touched a piano in almost a decade, and she was inviting me to watch her play beside one. I almost declined. But something, maybe curiosity, maybe a flicker of old pride, made me type, "I'll be there." For weeks afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every memory came rushing back. The smell of polish on my old piano lid, the faint buzz of the wires, the sound of my father's laughter as I practiced, and that hollow space in the living room. By the time the gala night arrived, I had convinced myself I was over it, that I'd grown up, moved on. I wore a simple black dress and tied my hair back, like I was going to a funeral. The venue was breathtaking, crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, tables dressed in gold and white. Sophie looked radiant on stage, the crowd's favorite as always. She spotted me from across the room and waved, her smile genuine and bright. For a moment, I almost felt proud. Then the spotlight shifted. An announcer stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's special performance will feature Miss Sophie Morgan, accompanied by the historic 1985 Yamaha upright, recently restored to perfection." My breath caught. 1985 Yamaha upright. The spotlight glowed over the piano. And I knew. The scratches on the lid. The small chip on the left pedal. It was my piano. The room tilted for a second. My pulse roared in my ears. My mother stood in the second row, elegant in pearls, smiling like she'd won a prize. I wanted to scream, to walk up and tell everyone what she'd done. But I didn't. I just stood there, frozen, as Sophie sat down and played the opening chords, light, airy, graceful. And in that moment, all I could think about was the sound of my father's voice saying, "A few scars don't make it any less beautiful." He was right. But I wasn't sure if he'd meant the piano or me. When the performance ended, applause thundered through the hall. Sophie stood, bowed, and turned toward me with that same sweet smile. The audience clapped. Cameras flashed. And I felt something inside me shift. Not anger, not jealousy, but a deep, unshakable resolve. Because that piano, that memory, that betrayal, it wasn't the end of my story. It was just the intermission. The night of Sophie's gala stayed with me like a song that refused to end. Even after the applause faded, after the crowd dispersed and champagne glasses clinked in the background, I couldn't stop staring at that piano. My piano. It sat there under soft golden lights, its familiar scratches gleaming like old wounds reopened. I could still trace every mark in my mind. The small dent where I dropped a metronome, the faded spot near middle C for my fingertips pressing the same notes over and over. I thought I was imagining it at first. But when the event manager came by and gently closed the lid, I saw it, the tiny, almost invisible heart-shaped sticker on the corner. My sticker. I'd put it there when I was 11. There was no doubt left. It was mine. I don't remember walking out of the hall. My feet just carried me, past the crowd, past Sophie's laughing friends, past my mother's proud smile. I stepped outside into the cold night air and breathed like I'd been holding my breath for 10 years. I could still hear the music faintly behind me, Sophie's encore piece. The sound of my piano in someone else's hands. When I finally got to my car, my hands were shaking so badly, I dropped the keys twice before getting them into the ignition. It was ridiculous, really. It was just a piano, I told myself. Just wood and strings and pedals. But it wasn't. It was my childhood. My father's memory. My identity. And she sold it like it was nothing. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face, calm and content, like she hadn't stolen something sacred. And Sophie's bright, oblivious, glowing with innocence. I wanted to be happy for her. I really did. But beneath the guilt, there was something darker, a pulse of resentment I'd tried to bury for years, now clawing its way back to the surface. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, staring into a cold cup of coffee, when my phone buzzed. A message from Sophie. Clara, I'm so glad you came last night. It meant a lot. You looked beautiful. Mom was thrilled to see you too. Thrilled. That word made my jaw tighten. Then another message followed. Oh, and guess what? The piano I played last night, it used to belong to some girl years ago, the seller said. Kinda sweet, right? I read that line at least 5 times. I typed back, yeah, sweet. Then turned off my phone. For the rest of the week, I couldn't shake the ache. It wasn't just the betrayal anymore. It was the fact that no one remembered. Not my mother, not Sophie. It was like the past had been erased, rewritten to fit their story. That's when something inside me shifted. Not a desire for revenge. Not yet, but for truth. For reclamation. I needed to see her. When I finally drove to my mother's house 2 weeks later, it felt like stepping into a museum of my own erasure. Everything looked smaller, duller, emptier. The pictures on the walls had been updated, new frames, new memories. None of them with me. She was in the kitchen when I arrived, slicing fruit. The moment she saw me, her face brightened. Clara, what a surprise. I forced a smile. Hey, Mom. She hugged me, smelling faintly of lilac and dish soap. It felt mechanical. Her arms were soft but distant, like she was hugging out of habit, not love. We sat at the table, and she poured me coffee like it was any ordinary day. I'm glad you came to Sophie's gala, she said. Wasn't it lovely? She's really doing well for herself. You should have seen all the photographers. I saw. I interrupted before I could stop myself. My tone must have shifted because she paused, spoon halfway to her cup. What's wrong? I stared at her. The piano. Her expression didn't change at first. Then, slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line. What about it? It was mine. Her eyes flickered, barely. Oh, Clara, don't start this again. Start what again? I asked, my voice shaking. Acknowledging what you did? I did what I had to do, she said, her voice calm, practiced. We didn't have money then. Sophie needed that dress. You were already moving on from music. Moving on? You took the only thing I had left of Dad, and you call that moving on? Her eyes hardened. Enough. That word, that sharp, cutting word, was one she used often when I was a teenager. It always meant your feelings don't matter here. But this time, I didn't shrink. I leaned forward. You could have sold anything else, Mom. The car. The TV. Anything. But you sold my piano. His piano. She looked away, her jaw tight. You were never going to be a professional musician, Clara. I was saving you from disappointment. And it's been 10 years. Why bring this up now? Because I saw it again. Because you didn't even remember what you stole. Because I can't keep pretending this didn't destroy something in me. But I didn't say any of that. I just stood up, my hands trembling. I just wanted to hear you admit it. I said quietly. That you chose her over me. Her silence was answer enough. As I turned to leave, I heard her sigh. Clara, you've always been so sensitive. That was it. The last nail in the coffin. I drove home with tears I didn't want to shed. Not for her. Not anymore. But crying was muscle memory by now, a reflex my heart hadn't unlearned. When I got home, I pulled my old sheet music from a dusty box in the closet. The pages were yellowed, edges curled. My handwriting was everywhere, tiny notes, arrows, reminders. Slow here. Breathe. Dad's favorite part. I sat on the floor and traced my finger over the title of one. River Flows in You. That night, I couldn't sleep again. But this time, instead of lying awake, I opened my laptop and searched for secondhand pianos. I wasn't looking for a replacement. I just wanted something. A beginning. That's when I saw it, an ad from a small restoration shop downtown. Vintage 1985 Yamaha upright, limited display availability. Restored and used recently for Portland Philharmonic Gala. My breath caught. No, it couldn't be. I called the number before I could overthink it. A man answered. His voice was warm, friendly. Harper's Restoration, this is Tom. Hi, I said, my voice shaking. I saw your listing, the Yamaha upright from the Philharmonic Gala. Is it still available? There was a pause. It's not for sale, unfortunately, he said. It was on loan for that event. Belongs to a private collector now. My heart sank. Do you know who? I'm sorry, I can't share client details, he said kindly. But if it helps, we're hosting an open studio night next month. The collector sometimes attends. You're welcome to come by. I thanked him and hung up, staring at my reflection in the dark laptop screen. My eyes were red, tired, but alive in a way they hadn't been in years. Maybe it wasn't about getting the piano back. Maybe it was about reclaiming the part of me my mother had sold off with it. The weeks leading up to the open studio night were strange. My life felt split in two, the quiet, orderly Clara who worked at her desk job, and the restless, defiant Clara who stayed up late reading about piano restoration, listening to old recordings, reteaching herself scales on a borrowed keyboard. For the first time in years, I felt that spark again. Not happiness exactly, but purpose. Sophie called once during that time. Hey, haven't heard from you since the gala. Everything okay? Yeah, I lied. Just busy. You sure? Mom said you seemed upset that night. Of course she did. I hesitated, then said, Do you remember the piano you played? The Yamaha? Yeah, it was beautiful. She laughed softly. Kind of funny, though. Mom said it reminded her of yours when we were kids. I swallowed hard. It was mine. What? She sold it. Years ago. For your dress. Silence. When Sophie finally spoke, her voice was small. Clara, I didn't know. I know. I'm so sorry. Her apology was quiet, sincere. But it didn't erase the years of distance or the fact that she got to live the dream I lost. Still, something inside me softened. She wasn't the villain. She never was. When we hung up, I felt lighter, not healed, but clearer. The night of the studio event, I dressed simply again. Black dress, hair pulled back. The smell of wood polish and varnish filled the air as I walked in. Rows of pianos lined the floor, each glowing under warm light. Then I saw it. My piano. There was no mistaking it, the sticker, the dent, everything. And standing beside it, talking to a small crowd, was the collector, a woman in her 50s with gentle eyes and silver hair. I waited until the crowd thinned, then approached her. Beautiful instrument, I said. She smiled. It is. You play? I used to. I hesitated. Actually, that piano used to be mine. Her eyebrows rose. Truly? I told her everything. Not all the pain, not the tears, just enough for her to understand. When I finished, she looked at me for a long moment. Then she said quietly, It seems this piano still remembers you. And then, without hesitation, she said, Would you like to play it? My hands trembled as I sat down. The keys felt both foreign and familiar, cold but alive. I pressed one, middle C, and the sound filled the room, pure and full. For the first time in 10 years, I played. Not for anyone else. Not for applause. Just for me. And maybe, somewhere deep in the sound, for my father. As I played, I realized something. Sometimes the things we lose don't disappear. They wait, for us to be strong enough to find them again. And I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The sound of that first note stayed with me for days. It wasn't just the sound, it was the feeling that came with it. The vibration under my fingertips, the resonance in my chest, the way every key seemed to recognize me. That night at the restoration studio, I played until my hands shook. People came and went, some stopping to listen, others whispering quietly. But I didn't see them. I was somewhere else, in the small living room of my childhood home, my father smiling softly in the corner, saying, "There you go, Clara. Let the piano breathe." When I finally stopped, the silver-haired collector, her name was Evelyn Shaw, stood beside me. Her eyes were bright with emotion. "You play beautifully," she said. "The kind of beauty that comes from pain." I smiled, embarrassed. It's been a long time. Not long enough to forget, apparently. She studied me for a moment. "Would you like to come back sometime? The piano's here most days. I think it misses you." I almost laughed, but there was something in her tone that made me nod. I'd like that. Over the next few weeks, I started visiting Evelyn's studio regularly. Sometimes in the evenings after work, sometimes on weekends. The place became a quiet refuge from the chaos of life, from my mother's clipped phone calls, from Sophie's perfect public life splashed across social media, from the dull ache of existing in a world that once silenced me. The studio smelled like varnish and old wood. Each piano had its own voice, its own mood. Some bright and playful, others deep and melancholic. But mine, my piano, was both. It carried joy and grief in equal measure. I'd sit there for hours, playing pieces I used to love, Chopin, Debussy, Yuruma. Sometimes I improvised, letting my fingers wander across the keys like they were rediscovering the language they'd forgotten. Evelyn would listen quietly, never interrupting. When I finished, she'd smile that soft, knowing smile and say, "You've still got the fire." One evening, as I was packing up, she asked, "Have you ever performed publicly?" I shook my head. "Not since high school." "That's a shame," she said thoughtfully. "You should. You have something people need to hear, not just skill, but truth." I laughed it off at first. Me perform again? After everything? But later that night, as I sat alone with a cup of tea and the faint soreness in my fingers, her words lingered. Truth. Music had always been my truth. And I'd let someone steal it from me. Not anymore. Around that time, Sophie started reaching out more. Maybe it was guilt, maybe curiosity, but she called every few days, wanting to catch up. "I didn't know about the piano, Clara," she said one evening, her voice quiet. "I can't believe Mom did that." "Believe it," I said softly. "She didn't even tell me. She made it sound like she just borrowed money from someone." God, I feel awful. "You don't need to," I told her honestly. "It wasn't your fault." Still, there was something fragile in her tone, a guilt that sounded genuine. And I realized then how tightly my mother had controlled our narratives, how she'd turned Sophie into the golden child by design. Sophie wasn't my enemy. She was another piece in Mom's careful arrangement, another instrument in her orchestra of appearances. So I forgave her, quietly. Not out loud, but inside myself. When she invited me to her next event, a charity gala for young artists, I hesitated, then agreed. Part of me wanted to see her world up close again. Another part wanted to see if the pain still hurt as much as it used to. It did, but differently. The gala was held at a downtown hotel ballroom, elegant and glittering. Sophie was radiant, as always, mingling with donors and photographers. When she saw me, she rushed over, hugging me tightly. "I'm so glad you came," she said. "You look amazing." I smiled. "You too. Always the star." She blushed. "Stop." I noticed Mom across the room, talking animatedly to a group of women. She hadn't seen me yet. Her hair was perfect, her jewelry subtle but expensive. Everything about her screamed control. A small ache flared in my chest, but this time, it didn't consume me. I stayed for most of the event, chatting with people, sipping wine. When it was time for Sophie's performance, a spoken tribute to her sponsors, I clapped, proud despite myself. Then, after the show, something unexpected happened. The host, a man in his 60s, elegant and kind-eyed, came over to me. "You're Clara Morgan, right? Sophie's sister?" I nodded, wary. "She mentioned you used to play piano," he said. "We're actually organizing a music segment for next year's gala. We'd love to feature local talent. If you ever want to return to the stage, give me a call." He handed me his card. I smiled politely and tucked it into my purse, but inside, something stirred, that old flicker of ambition, of possibility. When I got home that night, I placed the card on my desk and stared at it. My reflection looked back at me, older, steadier, no longer the scared girl sitting in an empty living room. Maybe it was time. The next few months became a blur of rediscovery. I practiced constantly, often late into the night, my fingers flying over the keys until my neighbors banged on the wall. I started recording myself, listening back, fixing mistakes, finding my rhythm again. Evelyn noticed the change immediately. "You're playing like someone who has something to prove," she said one evening, smiling. "Maybe I do," I admitted. She raised an eyebrow. "To whom?" I paused, then said softly, "My mother." "Maybe to myself too." She nodded. "Then play until neither of them can deny what you are." I took her words to heart. A few weeks later, Evelyn invited me to perform at one of her studio's public showcases, a small, intimate evening for local artists and friends. My hands trembled when she asked, but I said yes. The night of the performance, I wore a simple black dress again. Nothing fancy. Nothing that screamed for attention. I didn't want to look like Sophie. I wanted to look like me. When my name was called, I walked to my piano, and sat down. The room was quiet, expectant. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play River Flows in You. Every note was a confession. Every pause a memory. The room disappeared. It was just me and the music, the grief, the anger, the love. When I finished, there was silence. Then applause, slow at first, then growing. I looked up and saw Evelyn smiling proudly from the corner. Later, as the guests mingled, a woman approached me, elegant, with sharp green eyes and a press badge. "I'm from the Portland Weekly," she said. That was stunning. "Have you ever thought about performing professionally?" I laughed. "It's been a while." "Well," she said, handing me a card, "maybe it's time to change that. We're doing a feature on local musicians next month. You'd be perfect." It was surreal. For years, I'd been invisible. And now, suddenly, people were seeing me. When the article came out, it was titled, "The Woman Who Found Her Voice Again." My story, condensed, softened, but mine. They even mentioned the Yamaha, though I didn't share the betrayal behind it. Some truths I kept for myself. But the article spread faster than I expected. Friends reached out. Old teachers. Even my boss, who said, "Didn't know we had a pianist in the office." And then, of course, my mother called. "Clara," she said, her tone sharp with that mix of pride and control she always carried. "I saw the article. Why didn't you tell me you were performing again?" "I didn't think you'd care," I said simply. "Of course I care. You're my daughter." "Am I?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. There was a pause. Then she sighed. "You've always been so dramatic. I just don't understand why you feel the need to air family matters in public." I almost laughed. "I didn't mention you, Mom. I can read between the lines." Of course she could. Then she said something that froze me. "You know, Sophie's been invited to perform at the annual City Gala next spring. It's going to be televised. You should come. Maybe it'll inspire you." Inspire me? That was the moment the idea began to take shape, not out of spite, but out of justice. The same event, the same piano, the same family that had silenced me. But this time, I wouldn't be watching from the shadows. I called Evelyn that night. "Evelyn," I said, heart pounding, "I need your help." She laughed softly. "That's a dangerous sentence. I want to perform again, publicly. Bigger than before. Something that matters." There was silence, then the faint smile in her voice. "Tell me when and where." Over the next few months, I prepared. Harder than I ever had. My fingers blistered, my wrists ached, but I didn't care. I poured every drop of pain, every ounce of anger and love into my music. It wasn't about revenge anymore, not exactly. It was about reclaiming the sound they'd taken from me, about turning my silence into something that demanded to be heard. Still, there was a part of me, the small, bruised part, that wanted my mother to see. To sit in the audience and finally understand what she'd destroyed. To hear, note by note, what she'd sold. And when the invitations went out for the Portland Philharmonic Gala 2025, I made sure one found its way directly to Linda Morgan's mailbox. When you've been treated as invisible your whole life, sometimes the smallest act of being seen can change everything. The Music Academy was nothing like the dusty rooms I'd been used to. There were high ceilings that echoed every note like a cathedral of sound. Polished floors that reflected stage lights like tiny suns. The first time I stepped onto that stage, my heart felt like it was waking up after years of hibernation. I had been accepted into the city's Conservatory of Music on a partial scholarship. It wasn't easy. I'd had to prove myself 10 times more than anyone else because my background screamed small-town nobody. But when my fingers touched those grand pianos, all the noise in my head, the resentment, the pain, the bitterness, melted into melody. Still, healing wasn't simple. There were nights when I'd sit by the dorm window, staring out at the city lights, thinking of that piano. The one my mother sold. The one that held all my childhood dreams, traded for a dress my sister probably wore once. I wondered if my mother ever thought about me when she saw it, if guilt ever crept into her mind when she looked at the empty corner where my piano used to stand. But then I'd close my eyes and remember the sound of the keys, the feeling of creation beneath my fingertips. That memory alone kept me going. One late afternoon, Professor Morgan, my composition mentor, called me into her office. She was a woman in her 60s, silver hair pinned neatly, eyes sharp as glass, but heart softer than most. She gestured for me to sit, then asked, "Have you ever considered performing publicly, Amelia?" My stomach twisted. I've performed at small events, but not big ones. She smiled faintly. "You're ready. There's a winter gala coming up, major sponsors, industry people, even critics. I want you to perform one of your own compositions. Something personal." Something personal. The phrase lingered in my mind for days. I began sketching melodies in my notebook, scribbling down emotions I didn't have words for. At first, I tried to write something graceful, poised, something that would make people smile. But everything sounded false. And then one night, I stopped pretending. I sat in the practice room long after everyone else had gone. The lights were dim, the world outside quiet. I thought about the piano being wheeled away from our living room, my mother's indifferent face, my sister's laughter echoing down the hallway as she twirled in her new dress. I thought about every time I'd been told to quiet down, to stop dreaming, to make myself smaller. My fingers began to play. The melody came out raw, trembling at first, then surging with anger, with grief, with all the words I'd swallowed for years. It was messy, imperfect, but real. Every note was a confession. Every chord was a scar. When I finished, tears blurred my vision. That piece became Ashes of Ivory. It was unlike anything I'd written before. The song told a story, my story, of something once beautiful being burned and reborn into something stronger. Professor Morgan listened to it once and said quietly, "This is your truth, Amelia. Let them hear it." So, I practiced, day and night. Each time I played it, I could feel myself reclaiming what was stolen from me. Not just a piano, but a sense of worth. A week before the gala, I received a call from my sister, Clara. It startled me. We hadn't spoken in years, not since that night. Her voice was lighter than I remembered, but there was tension hiding beneath the surface. "Amelia, hey," she started. "I heard from Mom that you're performing in the city?" "Yes," I said slowly. "How'd she find out?" "Oh, she keeps tabs on you more than she admits," Clara replied. "Anyway, funny coincidence. I'm actually attending that same gala. It's my event. The hospital board is honoring me for organizing their charity campaign." I went silent. Of course. The universe had a wicked sense of irony. The same girl who got a dress spot with my piano would now stand in the spotlight of the same stage I'd be playing on. That's nice, I managed. Yeah, she said quickly, sensing the awkwardness. Look, I know things weren't great between us, but maybe this can be a fresh start. Her voice carried that polished charm she always had, the kind people used when they wanted forgiveness, without acknowledging the wound. I said I'd think about it, but after I hung up, my hands trembled. Part of me wanted to cancel, to disappear before the past caught up. But another part of me, the one that had lived on scraps of self-worth for too long, whispered, no. You've earned this. The day of the gala arrived with the crisp bite of winter. The city was dressed in lights and gold, every storefront glowing like it was dipped in luxury. Inside the grand hall, chandeliers spilled light across the marble floor. The air smelled of perfume and champagne, of money and ambition. I was led backstage by an event coordinator who spoke quickly, half distracted by her headset. As I passed the open curtain, I caught a glimpse of the audience. Rows of elegantly dressed guests, cameras flashing, laughter echoing like glass breaking. And there, near the front table, was Clara. She looked stunning, of course. That same poise, that same effortless grace that had always made her my mother's favorite. My mother sat beside her, silver hair pinned perfectly, pearls gleaming. They looked like they belonged in that world. And I was the girl who'd been written out of their picture. But I wasn't that powerless girl anymore. When it was my turn to perform, the announcer introduced me as Amelia Hart, composer and pianist, performing an original piece. The applause was polite, detached. No one knew my story. Not yet. I sat at the piano and froze. The instrument in front of me wasn't just any piano. It was that piano. My piano. The one my mother sold. The tiny nick above the high C key, the faint scratch on the fallboard. I knew those marks like the lines on my own hands. My breath caught in my throat. For a second, I thought it had to be coincidence. But then I saw the inscription faintly carved inside the lid. My initials. A jolt went through me like lightning. Somehow, through the years, through countless owners and paths, fate had brought this instrument back to me. Tonight, of all nights. I pressed a single key. The sound that came out was hauntingly familiar. I closed my eyes and began to play. The first notes floated into the air like a confession whispered to strangers. The room fell silent. Every emotion I'd buried poured through my fingers: sorrow, fury, forgiveness, longing. In the middle of the piece, I opened my eyes briefly. My mother's face was pale, eyes wide. Clara's smile had faltered, and I kept going. The final notes trembled into silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then applause erupted. Thunderous, genuine, overwhelming. I stood, my hands still shaking, and looked directly at them. My mother, my sister. For the first time in my life, they couldn't look away. That night, I walked off the stage knowing I'd done something bigger than revenge. I had reclaimed the one thing they could never take from me, my voice. But life, as it turns out, wasn't done testing me. Because after the performance, Clara came backstage, her heels clicking like punctuation marks of tension. She smiled tightly. That was incredible. Really? Thanks, I said, my tone cautious. She hesitated, glancing at the piano. You probably don't know, but that instrument was auctioned from an estate last year. I arranged for it to be used at this gala. I had no idea it was yours. I studied her. Didn't you? Her eyes flickered. Amelia, come on, let's not start this. The air between us was sharp, electric. Then she added quietly, Mom's not doing well.
She wanted to talk to you tonight.
Maybe it's time. Her words hung in the air like smoke. And that's where I stood, between the ghosts of what was lost and the uncertain road of what came next. That night wasn't the end of the story. It was only the moment I stopped playing for approval and started playing for myself. The applause still echoed in my chest long after it faded from the hall. I should have felt triumphant, and I did, in a way, but beneath that surge of vindication was something raw, unsettled. The performance had been more than a piece of music. It had been a confession delivered to an audience that had no idea what they were witnessing. But two people in that room did. My mother, my sister, and now one of them was waiting for me backstage. Clara stood in the narrow corridor lined with flowers and gift baskets, her gown glimmering beneath the dim lights. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She had always looked composed, elegant, like someone untouched by chaos. But tonight, I noticed her hands trembling, clutching her purse like it was a shield. "That was beautiful," she said finally, voice barely above a whisper. "Really? You've become incredible." I wanted to thank her, to accept the compliment at face value, but bitterness rose in my throat like bile. "It's funny," I said softly. "That piano used to belong to me. You remember?" Her eyes flickered, guilt flashing across her face before she masked it with a shaky smile. "I didn't know it was the same one, Amelia. Honestly, it's been years." "Years don't erase things," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. Clara sighed, stepping closer. "Look, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. I just wanted to tell you that Mom's here tonight. She's not doing well. She wants to talk to you." The air between us thickened. My stomach twisted. "Why now?" "Because she's been living with what she did," Clara said quietly. "She won't say it out loud, but it's been eating her alive. You should see her, Amelia. Please." I looked at my sister, this woman who had once been the reason my dreams were sold, and for the first time, I saw someone fragile, human. Not the flawless golden girl, but a daughter caught between guilt and loyalty. I hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. Lead the way." We walked down a hallway that smelled faintly of old wood and perfume. The noise from the gala dimmed as we moved further into the private lounge area reserved for organizers and VIPs. When I saw her, my mother, my breath caught. She sat in a chair by the window, wrapped in a gray shawl. Her hair, once jet black and immaculate, was streaked with silver now. Her posture was still proud, but her eyes looked tired. We hadn't spoken in over 5 years, but those eyes pulled me back to childhood in an instant, to nights of practicing scales under her disapproving stare, to the sound of her voice saying, "Music won't feed you." When she saw me, her expression faltered. "Amelia," she breathed, as though saying my name hurt. "You look older." I swallowed hard. That's what happens when you grow up without your family. Her mouth twitched at my tone, but she didn't argue. Instead, she gestured toward the seat across from her. "Sit." I sat, not because I wanted to obey her, but because I needed to hear what she had to say. For a moment, silence stretched between us. Clara stood near the doorway, uncertain whether to stay or leave. My mother's fingers twisted in her lap before she finally spoke. "I saw your performance," she said. "It was moving, painful, but beautiful." I met her gaze. "It was about the piano. You know that, right?" Her eyes filled with something between shame and defensiveness. "I did what I thought was best at the time. We were struggling, Amelia." "No." I cut her off. "We weren't starving. You didn't sell it to keep the lights on. You sold it to buy Clara a dress. You made a choice. You decided her image mattered more than my passion." Her lips tightened. "She had an important night, Amelia. She was your favorite," I said flatly. The words hung in the air like smoke. My mother looked away, blinking hard. "You think I didn't love you," she whispered. "But I did. You were just difficult to love sometimes. So stubborn. Always lost in your music." I felt the sting of her words, not because they were harsh, but because they were so familiar. I'd been hearing them, in one form or another, my entire life. "So you punish me for being different," I said quietly. Her eyes snapped back to mine. "I wanted you to be practical, to survive. Music wasn't going to give you a life." "Well, it did," I said. "And you know what's funny? That same piano you sold for a dress, I played it tonight, at your perfect daughter's perfect gala. Fate has a dark sense of humor, doesn't it?" She flinched as though struck. For a moment I wanted to stop. I wanted to let her off the hook, to soften the edges like I used to, just to keep the peace. But I couldn't. Not this time. I used to sit at that piano every night. I continued, my voice trembling. It was the only thing that made me feel like I mattered. And when you sold it, you didn't just take away an instrument. You took away the part of me that believed I was worth keeping. Tears welled in her eyes, but she said nothing. Finally, she whispered, "You're right. I failed you. I was so focused on appearances, on keeping the family together, on making things look perfect, that I didn't see what I was destroying." The words I'd waited years to hear finally came, but instead of relief, I felt an ache that cut deeper. "You can't undo it," I said softly. "No," she agreed. "But maybe I can try to understand. Maybe we can start again." Clara stepped forward then, her voice trembling. "We've both missed you, Amelia. I know I can't change what happened, but I was young too, selfish and stupid. That dress, that night, it wasn't worth losing you." I looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes, the way regret softened her once flawless demeanor. For years, I dreamed of them apologizing. I'd imagined shouting, slamming doors, maybe even walking away victorious. But now that I had what I wanted, the satisfaction I'd expected wasn't there. What I felt instead was exhaustion, the kind that comes after carrying a weight too long. I stood slowly. "You both made your choices. I made mine too. And tonight, I proved to myself that I don't need anyone's permission to exist." My mother's voice cracked. "Does that mean you're walking away again?" I hesitated. "It means I'm finally walking for myself." For the first time, I saw tears spill freely down her cheeks. She reached for my hand, but I didn't move closer. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, "even if I don't deserve to be." I nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement, not forgiveness yet, but the start of something real. Then I turned to Clara. "You did well tonight. I hope the charity helps a lot of people." She looked at me, surprised by the softness in my voice. "Thank you, Amelia." And then, after a long pause, she asked, "Will I ever see you again?" I gave her a small, tired smile. "Maybe. But if you do, I want it to be because you came to hear me play, not because you needed something from me." Her lip trembled, but she nodded. "I understand." When I stepped outside into the cold night air, the city lights glittered like 1,000 tiny possibilities. My breath fogged in front of me, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel heavy. I walked down the marble steps alone, but not lonely. My life had been one long crescendo leading to this. Not revenge, not even forgiveness, but reclaiming my story. As I passed the grand hall, I glanced back once through the glass doors. Inside, the piano sat on the stage, gleaming under the lights. For a heartbeat, I thought about all the times I'd played it as a child, the dreams that were silenced, and the music that refused to die. Then I whispered, "Thank you," not to my mother or sister, but to the piano itself, the one constant that had carried me through the noise. I didn't need anyone's validation anymore. I had already played my truth, and that was enough. The night after the gala felt strangely quiet, as though the world had exhaled and left me standing in the stillness. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages from classmates, professors, even strangers who'd attended the event. They called my performance haunting, soulful, unforgettable. But what none of them knew was that those weren't just compliments. They were echoes in the hollow place I'd carried inside me for years. I stayed up until dawn replaying that night in my head. My mother's trembling hands. Clara's broken voice. The familiar piano under my fingertips. Every detail burned into me like a scar that finally stopped bleeding. The next morning, I walked to the conservatory earlier than usual. The winter air bit at my cheeks, but it also felt clean, a reset. I let myself into an empty practice room, sat at the piano, and just breathed. For the first time in my life, there was no bitterness in the sound. The notes felt lighter, freer. I wasn't playing to prove anything anymore. I wasn't fighting ghosts. I was just playing. Halfway through a piece, Professor Morgan entered quietly, her coffee steaming in one hand. She listened for a moment before saying, "You've changed your tone, Amelia." I smiled faintly. Maybe because I'm not angry anymore. She nodded, setting her cup down. Anger can be a powerful teacher, but peace makes the art timeless. We talked for a while about the gala, about the reaction it was getting online. Someone had recorded my performance, and apparently, the video had gone viral overnight. I hadn't even known. You might want to check your email, Professor Morgan said with a twinkle in her eye. There's interest from a few labels and one documentary producer. I laughed softly, disbelieving. A documentary? About me? About your story, she said. The girl who lost her piano and found it again years later. People are moved by that kind of poetry. I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same pain that had once made me feel small was now the reason people wanted to listen. That night, I finally opened my inbox. Dozens of messages flooded the screen, some from journalists, others from strangers who had seen the video. One read, "Your story reminded me of my daughter. She gave up painting because we couldn't afford supplies. I'm going to buy her a new set today. Thank you." Another said, "I've been estranged from my sister for years. After hearing your performance, I called her." Tears blurred my vision. I hadn't realized the ripple my pain could create, how one act of reclaiming could give others the courage to do the same. But fame wasn't what I wanted. Not really. What I wanted was peace, the kind that doesn't depend on applause or approval. A few weeks later, I received a call from a gallery curator who was organizing a mixed-media art exhibit on loss and resilience. They wanted me to compose a live performance piece for the opening night, something intimate, emotional. I accepted. The night of the event, the space was filled with dim lighting and abstract art, sculptures made from broken glass, canvases painted over scars of old tears. It felt like walking through a museum of healing. When it was time for my performance, I stepped up to the piano and took a deep breath. This piece, I told the audience, is called Echoes of Home. It's about learning that sometimes home isn't a place or a person. It's a sound that stays inside you, waiting to be played again. And as I began to play, something inside me shifted permanently. The music wasn't about my mother or Clara anymore. It wasn't about revenge or reconciliation. It was about me, about reclaiming every note, every moment of silence, and turning it into something whole. After the performance, people came up to me with tears in their eyes, thanking me for the vulnerability, for the honesty. But what they didn't know was that the gratitude went both ways. Their listening, their presence, it made me feel seen in a way I hadn't been since I was a child sitting at that old piano. Days turned into weeks, and the attention didn't fade. I was invited to give a TED-style talk at a creative arts symposium. The theme was turning pain into power. I almost said no. Talking about my family in front of hundreds of people felt like reopening a wound. But then I realized something. The story wasn't about blame anymore. It was about truth. When the day came, I stood under the bright lights, the microphone cool in my hand. I grew up believing that love had to be earned. I began. That if I played well enough, behaved well enough, maybe one day I'd be enough. But life has a strange way of teaching you. Sometimes the things taken from you are the very things that lead you to yourself. I told them about the piano, the betrayal, the gala. And then I said the line that had been living in my chest since that night. I didn't play that piano for forgiveness. I played it to remember who I was before I was told to quiet down. The room was silent. Then came applause, soft at first, then swelling, like a wave of recognition. I saw tears in people's eyes, and in that moment, I understood. This was bigger than me. After the talk, a woman approached me. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with kind eyes. "Your story reminded me of my daughter," she said. "We haven't spoken in years. Maybe it's time I call her." And that was when I knew healing wasn't something you hoard. It spreads, quietly, like music through a wall. Months passed. My career began to build momentum, but I kept my circle small. I sent Clara an email once, short, polite, genuine. I told her I hoped she was well. She replied the next day, "I'm proud of you, Amelia. Mom talks about you all the time now." She keeps that shawl from the gala in her room. Says it reminds her of the night she realized how wrong she was. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Tell her I'm okay. And that I forgive her, not because she asked, but because I need to be free. It felt strange, typing the word forgive. For years, I'd thought forgiveness meant letting people off the hook. But now I realized it was letting myself off the leash. As spring arrived, I started teaching part-time at the conservatory, mentoring young musicians who reminded me of my younger self. The shy girl who played like she was trying not to be heard. The boy afraid to take up space. I told them what I'd learned the hard way. Play like the world is already listening.
Even if it isn't yet.
Every now and then, I'd visit the concert hall where it all began. The staff had kept the piano, my piano, and let me use it for rehearsals whenever I wanted. One evening after class, I sat alone with it again. My reflection shimmered faintly on the polished lid. I ran my fingers along the keys, smiling at the familiar imperfections, the tiny nick above the high C, the scratch near middle E. Still with me, huh? I whispered. The sound that filled the room was warm, forgiving, alive. And as I played, I realized something profound. This piano wasn't just a relic of my past. It was proof that some things, no matter how far they travel, always find their way back home. I wasn't the same girl who'd once swept over its loss. I was a woman who'd learned that sometimes revenge looks like peace, and justice sounds like music. By the time I stopped playing, the sun had dipped below the skyline, painting the room in gold. The last note lingered in the air, shimmering like a memory that no longer hurt. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need applause. Because I finally believed in my own sound. The applause echoed long after I finished my final piece. I stood there, beneath the chandelier's golden light, as people rose to their feet. I could see faces, some astonished, others moved to tears, and in that moment, I knew every ounce of pain, every sleepless night, every wound had found its purpose. The piano, the very same one my mother had sold, now stood as both my weapon and my redemption. When the crowd finally began to settle, the host walked up with a trembling smile, the kind that mixes awe and disbelief. Ladies and gentlemen, he said into the microphone, what you just witnessed was more than music. It was a story told through every note, a story of loss, love, and unbelievable grace. Please, another round of applause for Amelia Carter. The thunder of clapping rolled again, louder this time, and I bowed low, my heart pounding. As I lifted my head, my eyes met my mother's. She was sitting in the front row, her expensive gown glinting under the lights. But her face, oh, her face was pale, almost ghostly. My sister, Melissa, sat beside her, still radiant in her glittering silver dress, the one that had cost me my dreams all those years ago. Yet even she wasn't smiling now. Her hand rested stiffly in her lap, her jaw tight. For a moment, time froze between us. No words, no gestures, just the raw truth hanging heavy in the air. She knew. My mother knew. That was my piano. My notes. My voice rising after years of silence. When the curtains fell and people began to mingle, reporters and photographers surrounded me. They asked questions about my music, my journey, my inspiration. I answered calmly, measured, still trembling inside, but determined to remain composed. Yes, I told one journalist, it's the same piano my family once owned. It's been through a lot, just like me. They loved that line. Cameras flashed. Pens scratched. But my eyes kept darting toward my mother and sister, who stood by the exit, clearly uncomfortable as the whispers spread. Someone had already told them. I could see the way heads turned, the subtle gasps of recognition. The irony of it all, the piano she'd sold for a dress had found its way back to me, and now I'd just performed on it at Melissa's gala. Karma doesn't always shout. Sometimes it plays a perfect note and lets silence do the rest. When the room emptied, I finally approached them. I walked slowly, my heels clicking against the marble floor, each step steady, deliberate. My mother's lips parted as if to speak, but she couldn't find the words. Melissa shifted awkwardly, clutching her clutch bag as though it could shield her. So, I said quietly, how did you like the performance? My mother blinked rapidly, searching for something, anger, justification, anything, but all she found was shame. You were beautiful, she whispered finally. I didn't know you still played. I smiled faintly. I never stopped. You just stopped listening. Her eyes glistened. I could tell she wanted to defend herself, to rewrite history like she always did, but maybe the truth was too heavy this time. I looked at the piano behind me, the polished wood gleaming in the dim light. Funny thing, I continued, the owner who bought it years ago passed away last spring. His son contacted me after reading an article about my music school. He said his father always felt the piano belonged to me. I guess it found its way home. Melissa looked at me then, her perfect mask cracking. You played beautifully, she said softly. I didn't know you still hated me. I shook my head. I don't hate you, Mel. I just stopped needing you to understand. For the first time, she had no clever reply, no defensive smirk. She simply looked down, her glittering dress shimmering like a ghost of everything it had cost me. That night, after everyone left and the stage was empty, I returned to the piano. I sat quietly, fingers brushing the keys, the same familiar warmth spreading through me. The hall was silent except for the soft hum of the lights overhead. I pressed a single key, C, the first note I ever learned, and closed my eyes. All the memories came flooding back. The girl sitting by the window at 12 years old, practicing until her fingers bled. The arguments, the slammed doors, the silent dinners after the piano disappeared. The tears that fell on notebook pages filled with unfinished songs. I had carried all of that, every piece of it, to this very moment. And now, I let it go. I played again just for myself this time, something gentle, almost like a lullaby. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It wasn't about revenge or humiliation. It was about reclaiming what was mine, peace, freedom, music. When I finished, the last note hung in the air like a whisper. Then, slowly, I rose, placed my hand on the piano's lid, and whispered, "We made it." A few weeks later, I received a letter from the city orchestra. They wanted me to perform as a guest pianist for their winter gala. The invitation was embossed in gold, the kind of thing I used to dream about. I said yes, of course. The same week, my mother called. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. Eventually, I did. "Amelia," she said, her voice small, uncertain. "I've been thinking about everything. What I did." I said nothing, letting her words hang in the silence. "I was wrong," she said finally. "I thought I was doing what was best for the family. I didn't see what I took from you. I'm sorry." It wasn't a grand apology, but it was something. And for the first time, I believed she meant it. "I forgive you," I said quietly. "But I can't forget." "I understand," she whispered. "I just hope one day you'll come home." I smiled sadly. "I already am home, Mom. I found it somewhere between those keys." We didn't talk much after that, but something in me settled, a wound finally closing. The winter gala came quickly. I performed again, this time not to prove a point, but to celebrate everything I'd become. People spoke my name with admiration now, not pity. I'd started a foundation for underprivileged kids to learn music, children who, like me once, had dreams bigger than their circumstances. On the opening night of the program, a little girl approached me after class. She couldn't have been more than 10. She looked up at me with bright eyes and said, "Miss Amelia, my mom says we can't afford a piano, but can I still learn?" I knelt beside her and smiled. "You don't need a piano to start. You just need heart. The rest will come." Her grin widened. "Can I be like you one day?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "You can be even better." That night, as I locked up the small music room, I caught sight of the old piano again, the same one that had started everything. I had placed it in the center of the studio, polished and glowing under the soft lights. It wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was a testament to resilience, forgiveness, and the strange, poetic way life returns what we thought was lost. Years passed, and I built a life that felt like my own symphony. Every mistake, every heartbreak, every triumph written into the notes. My sister eventually married, moved abroad, and sent polite holiday cards. My mother grew older, quieter. Sometimes we'd talk, sometimes not. But I never played for them again. Some performances are meant only for those who truly listen. One evening, I found myself alone at the studio. Rain tapped softly against the windows, the kind of night that makes the world feel smaller, more intimate. I sat at the piano and began to play something new, something I hadn't written down yet. It flowed from me effortlessly, like a conversation with my younger self. Halfway through, I laughed quietly. "You did it," I whispered to that 12-year-old girl in my memory. "You kept your promise." The song built slowly, each note a memory, joy, pain, hope, all blending together. And as I reached the final chord, I realized this wasn't revenge anymore. It was freedom. People often ask me now if I ever regretted what happened, if I wish my mother had never sold that piano. I always give the same answer. No, because without that betrayal, I would have never learned what I was truly capable of. I would have never known that strength isn't found in comfort. It's born in loss, in the quiet decision to keep going when no one believes in you. That piano wasn't just my past. It became my proof. My mother sold it to silence me, but it only taught me how to make the world listen louder. And so, whenever I play now, I let that memory live between the notes. The pain, the forgiveness, the rebirth, it's all there. My story, told again and again, every time my fingers touch the keys. Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge is simply becoming everything they said you couldn't be. Sometimes, revenge doesn't come in flames or fury. Sometimes, it walks quietly onto a stage, sits before an old piano, and lets the music speak. Amelia didn't have to destroy her mother's pride or her sister's dreams. She only had to rise above the pain they gave her. Because the truth is, betrayal doesn't end you. It reshapes you. It burns away everything fragile until only your strength remains. The same piano that once symbolized her loss became the proof of her power, her resilience, her grace. And that's the lesson her story leaves behind. You don't always need to fight to win. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge is peace, showing the world, and yourself, that what was meant to break you became your masterpiece. So if you've ever been betrayed, overlooked, or silenced, remember Amelia's story. Remember the music she played with hands that had once trembled. Because one day, your pain will turn into a melody too, and when it does, make sure the world listens.